lot of people don't realize how much trouble these little things can cause. Now, has anyone ever taken a condenser apart to see what's inside them? I've got, this is what they look like inside. This is a roll. You pass that around so people can see it. It's just a couple of strips of aluminum foil or 2 strips of mylar film just rolled into a tight little ball. That's all that's in there. And it doesn't seem like there would be much that could go wrong with these. And so you wonder, well, why are there so many problems with these stupid little things? Well, the reason is, let's try to test it. This is what most people use. It's just a standard ohmmeter. And Gary, if you could just step up here for a second. What people will do is they'll take a standard ohmmeter, you put it on the highest ohms range that you can get, and you go right across your condenser, and you'll see the needle will just make a little bit of a jump as the capacitor is charging up. I'll do this. See it?
I've got to jump up.
You can see what's going on here. As the capacitor is charging up, the needle will jump toward 0 briefly, and it'll go back toward infinite ohms. That means that it's a capacitor, and then it's not shorted. The other thing that you can do, well, let's measure it. Now, this meter, of course, has got a 9-volt battery in it. So we're going to actually measure the amount of voltage. Here, take these 2 test tubes. And measure right across what I'm doing right here, from black to red. Can you read the meter? About 8.5 volts. Okay? So this meter right here, this ohm meter, is putting 8.5 volts across this condenser when we're testing it. Another way to test things is with a capacitor meter.
Oh, when you check for ohms readings, would that tell you if that condenser's any good or not?
What I'm telling you is it won't.
It won't.
This is what most people do. And this is what I'm going to try to explain is why that's completely inadequate. This is a capacitor checker here. And this says that this capacitor is 0.29 microfarads. Now they're anywhere from like 0.15 to 0.4 microfarads are what these condensers typically are. And it's really non-critical. Anything will work. You're only trying to quench the spark so you don't burn your points a little bit. But once again, we're looking at this. And this one, I'll measure this. Gary, if you can tell me what it says. Oh, on that meter.
Oh, this one here?
Yeah. How many volts?
It's all over the place.
It's 1.5. Right. So this is measuring, and it's telling me that it's 0.29 microfarads, but I'm only putting 1.5 volts across it. So here's the story, which is really kind of funny. Well, it wasn't funny at the time. This is how people typically, check things. Now, they fail either because this is not hermetically sealed. You can get water in these even though there's a rubber plug in there. They can corrode to pieces, or you can get what they call plate failure due to coronal discharge, but this is really, really, really rare. What normally happens is the mylar film dries out over about 10 years. And when it gets dry, it gets little pinholes. And the pinholes are just enough for the voltage to arc between those 2 metal plates. And if it does arc, again, I took one and I unrolled it. This is at 75 power magnification. You can see the little pinholes in there where it was arcing through. Now here's the question, at what voltage does that arc through? What do you need? This character, believe it or not, was me 50 years ago. And I just bought this Honda motorcycle from a friend of mine, and it had a twin cylinders, it's a 66 motorcycle, so it had condensers and points, as you would expect. I completely rebuilt it, 20 coats of candy blue over silver. I'm going to restore this bike, it was beautiful. And I couldn't get the thing to run more than about 4,000 RPM to save my soul. I tried everything. I reset the points, I changed the condensers to brand new condensers, I put in, reset the valves. I cleaned the carburetor probably 5 times, tried rejetting it, I tried everything. I could not get that thing to go over 4,000 RPM for nothing. It would bang and pound and kick, and that was the end of the discussion. So what I did was, in desperation, I finally gave up, and I went to H&H Honda, and I brought it in there, and they said, it's $100 to fix it, and it was your condensers that were bad. And I said, I don't think so. I bought those condensers from you, all right? So if they were bad, you need to replace them. Oh no, they've got this policy, there's no return on electronic parts like most places, you know how that went. And I couldn't believe it because I said, I was in engineering school at the time. I had not only these kinds of, ohmmeters and capacitive checkers, I also had impedance bridges. I could tell you the effective series resistance, the Q, the dissipation factor. I knew damn well that this was a condenser, was perfectly good. Well, except it didn't work. And I got really, really mad because, back then, in '74, $100 went a long ways. A Honda 350 was $350. So you're not charging me the quarter of the cost of a whole new motorcycle just to tell me my condensers are bad. And I got really, really angry, and the police got involved. It was a real mess. And they finally, the owners of H&H Honda, they said, look, we don't want this to go any further. If you go in the back there, we'll have our mechanic give you, a lesson on how to test ignition systems and how to test capacitors correctly. If we do that, will you calm down and go away? All right, I agreed to it because the alternative, according to the police, was about a month in jail and then impound my bike. So I went to the back, and the mechanic back there said, look, you've got to have something like this, one of these really, really old ignition testers, in order to test things like this. This is a Graham Lee Model 31. But there's other ones, and you can see they have a little neon light on there. He says, that's what you're going to be looking for. And he put it on the tester, and sure enough, it showed that it failed. And I've got an ignition tester here. This is one that I did. It's you can find a schematic for this. If you want, I can send you a copy of this, but it was documented in the Antique Auto Folder about 2 issues back, I guess. I did this. But you can see, this is the good one. Here's the bad one. The bad one is the one we were testing. This is the one that we tested that passed all of our tests with the ohmmeters and with the capacitor checker. There it is. See the red light? It's bad. The insulation is breaking down. And so we tested that, and I said, well, why couldn't my ohmmeter find out that it was bad? He says, well, here's the thing. You had one of those old Sun ignition analyzers, remember those? All your garages used to have them. It was like an oscilloscope at the size of a refrigerator. And he hooked it up to the primary and secondary on my spark plug. He says, here's your primary voltage here. He says, read it out. And I says, okay, fine. It's 200 volts, it's 100 volts per division, so it's minus 200 volts in the first peak, plus 175, minus 150. So it's about 200 volts. He says, your problem was that you were only testing with about less than 10. That's 1/20th the voltage that you would need to actually test this at. He says, in fact, if you get rid of every one of your testers, throw them out. All you need is one of these, any tester that's got one of these little neon light devices on it. Because what they're going to do is they're going to put about 300 volts DC across that condenser. And if that insulation breaks down, the little neon light comes on. There's no other way that you can test a condenser. And worse, about 10% of the condensers that you buy brand new, and this was back in '74 when most cars were using condensers and you bought high quality parts. Today, it's really difficult to get a good condenser. It's really difficult because most of them are made in China, or the worst, the bad ones are from India. But you buy from Sierra or someplace like that, you have no idea where you got them from. Standard Magneto. Who's your friend at Standard Magneto, Gary?
When it's run.
Yeah, Ron and Standard Magneto, they still manufacture them, and they still make a pretty good condenser. But even then, like 1 out of 10 or so that you get from a place like that will be bad. You check it with your ohmmeter, you think it's good, you're going to put it in your engine, and the same thing's going to happen. You get up about half throttle. Idiot. What can happen is that as your RPM goes up, every generator increases in voltage. Your magneto is no different. So as the RPM goes up, the voltage that it generates, you can see that primary voltage will get a little bit bigger. And if it happens to cross the breakdown voltage of your condenser, you're going to start getting misfires and your engine's going to go nuts. I can't count how many people I've run into that have rebuilt their carburetor about 5 or 6 times or reset the points and ripped their hair out, couldn't figure out why their engine wasn't running. And it turned out to be just a bad condenser. It's a real problem. And you have to have something like this, either a brand new like this or an old Mercatronic, or as I said, I've got a schematic here for this tester that I designed, and it's documented. I'll put up a web address here shortly so you can actually contact me, and I can send you a schematic for how to build one of these. But this is the only way to test a condenser. It really is. Now that's my design. You can ask for a copy of the schematic. What I finally came up with, I said, look, these are so flaky that we were starting to show people how to rebuild them. And you can buy polyester film capacitors from places like DigiKey or Mouse, or you can buy them online. You can drill out your old condenser can and stick that in there, and it'll last for decades. The only problem is that many of your condenser fans are too short. They're little stubby things, or like the Phalon and some of the Mercury ones, they're just too small in diameter. The same thing just simply won't fit in there. So what we discovered is there's a brand new type of condenser that came out about 10 years ago. They're made out of fired ceramic and aluminum powder. They're called MLCC, multi-layer ceramic capacitors. This is 0.22 microfarads at 1,000 volts. It's microscopic. You can fit it into anything. And so I started to show people how to rebuild condensers using this. This is about 2 issues back in the antique outboarder, or you can look it up on the Western Reserve Club website. We've got all the articles up there for people to look at. But basically, you just put it on a drill press, drill the guts out of it, clean it out, and replace it with one of these ceramic capacitors, and then fill it up with epoxy. When you do that, you'll be dead 50 years before one of these will fail. I don't even know that there's no inherent wear-out mechanism in this. It'll be the last time you ever look at that condenser. End of discussion. Well, I published this in the magazine a couple of months ago, and a number of people were getting back to me. They said, well, we built it with your condensers, and it's still leaking. You put it on the shorts tester, and it was breaking down. Well, I couldn't believe it, but then I started looking. I had one guy send me one, and I took it apart. I don't know if you can see it. Can you see the stain on that condenser there? The lower one, let me blow it up a little bit more. What he had done when he had soldered it, the solder flux, because all solders, wire solders, have got flux in the core, otherwise it wouldn't stick. And so the solder flux looked like dried maple syrup on there, and that was enough to short the condenser out. I just always, whenever I would build these things, I would solder it, and then I would clean it with a little bit of isopropyl alcohol. And that's the correct way to do it. The other thing that people ran into was, some of the condensers that you can buy are a single brick, and it's really easy to clean it. Others are 2 ceramic capacitors that are stacked, and there's a little wafer-thin gap in between, and some of the flux can wick into there. You'll never get it out. It's impossible to get it out. So I'm telling people, just use the big cores like this. They cost about $5 for each one of these. But if you rebuild a condenser with this, and then pot it with either silicon sealer or epoxy. I like to use JB Weld. That's one of my favorite adhesives anymore. Or what you can do is this is one of the things that Gary likes to do, instead of putting it in the metal can, he just solders some wires onto the end of the core and put some heat shrink tubing on it, You can stick this in any motor anywhere. It's tiny. And as I said, you'll be dead 50 years before this will fail. It'll be the last time you ever have to look at a condenser ever again. So if you want to build one of these testers, because even a used Graham Lee like that is going to be about $150 for a good one. If somebody, will sell you a functional one, that's kind of expensive. I've been building these for about $25, $30, these standalone lights. If you want a schematic for and instructions for how to build that, just send me an email at wmohead@hotmail.com. If you want any of the instructions on magnetos or condensers or rebuilding them or anything, we have all of the former magazine articles that Gary and I and others have published are right on the Western Reserve Outboards.org site. You can just go to that website and there's a documents tab. Go down to the magazine articles. You can download any of the articles on any of these topics. We've got really good tutorials on magnetos and basic electronics and everything up there. It's really worth your while. And this is one of the reasons that you join the AOMCI, is so that you're not dealing with myth information and folklore, that you've got the real information for how to test things and do a repair once right the first time that you've done it over with it. Any questions? Yeah.
Gary, you said Gary likes to put shrink tube on things?
Yeah.
Does engine heat really affect that? You worry about engine heat affecting that?
After you put heat shrink on it?
Well, yeah, but I mean, you put it in an engine, but I would think the can is insulated, or am I wrong, from the heat from the engine?
Well, you're putting this right by the points.
Doesn't get that hot.
It doesn't get hot underneath.
Don't worry about that?
No. There's no heat to speak of underneath there. You don't have to worry about it.
You got bigger problems if you get that hot up there, right?
Oh, yeah. That's serious issues. Well, you pass it around, take a look at it, and this is, in fact, both of these. That's just the core by itself. And that's wired.
Do you have to solder your own leads on it?
Yeah, you do. And that's why, when people solder the leads on, they get the flux on it, and if you don't clean it off, then you're in trouble. If you do clean it off, and I said, I put it on the condenser checker and I make sure that it's really clean, that there's no shorts. Then I put it in a metal can and fill it up with epoxy. And I've never seen one of these fail. It's just, it won't happen, not in your lifetime. The nice thing about this too is that if you've got really old condensers that you can't find, and I see a lot of people will go up on eBay, they'll buy new old stock, and you'll see, it's a blister pack and it's all the cardboard is all broken because it's 40 years old or something like that. And I think because it hasn't been used, something like this, because it hasn't been used, that it's going to be good. And I'd say easily 80 or 90% of all the capacitors that I've seen that people bought new old stock were dead. In fact, GE, where Dominic used to work, they would not buy any condenser, film condenser, that was over 10 years since the date of manufacture. It was just forbidden. They wouldn't do it.
Are these
Even sitting in a warehouse, it'll just degrade and fall apart.
Are these the ones from China and India?
No, any of them, they all fall apart. All the plastic films
I was
degrade.
going to say, I know in the old cars, like MGs and Maserati's, they're getting these parts from China, and they're terrible.
Well, that's all who makes it anymore, except for that Standard Magneto in Illinois. They're the only domestic manufacturer still left.
Yeah.
But they make only a few, maybe a couple of dozen. And if they got, one that doesn't fit what you're looking for, you can either, like I said, take your original condenser and drill it out and put one of these ceramic cores in it, in which case you're done for life. That's it. It's a one-time repair. Or you can just, build it like this and stick it underneath the flywheel because nobody's going to see it. Now, I'm kind of nuts in terms of authenticity. I want it to look real inside and out. Mm-hmm. And once I'm done, encapsulating one, you can't tell that this is a rebuild. There's no way. Well, you have to look really, really close to tell I was there. But most people couldn't tell. And it's a one-time rebuild and you're done. Anything else?
When you're soldering those leads on there, does the heat from your iron degrade that resistor?
The ceramic core,
Yeah.
it's a solid ceramic slab. But, that being said, I'm not using a 100-watt iron. I'm not using a soldering gun or something like that. I'm using about a 15 or 20-watt iron. And I just tap it very, very gently. You can, the metal caps on the ends of that ceramic core, you can't overheat them and get them to delaminate and come off. If you're using like a 100-watt iron and it's, breaking the dickens out of it, you can't break it. But if you put it together quickly and then clean it off with the alcohol, test it again to make sure that you've got all the residue off. Even residue you can't see is enough to generate a short. But once it's cleaned and it passes the test on the tester before you encapsulate it, that's the last time you'll ever touch that condenser for the rest of your life. That's it. It's a one-time fix. Anything else?
Just go on the internet, and sell them.
Excuse me?
Put them on the internet and sell them.
There's a place down in Australia that actually patented this, and I don't think you can.
Oh, okay.
But you're going to patent where a capacitor can be used? I'm not going to fight it. And nobody, I mean, if you rebuild a couple of hundred yourself in your basement, nobody's going to bother with it. It's just not an issue. But it takes quite a bit of time. When you're drilling these old condensers out and pulling all the guts out, it's an hour or so of work to rebuild a single one. It's not a trivial thing to do. But it's a one-time fix. And it can be done on even the shortest, stubbiest, smallest diameter condenser. You can still get this ceramic core to fit in there. And that's the end of the problems. But again, the message I'm trying to get out is, if I see up on, the AOMCI has a Facebook page. I don't know if any of you have ever seen it. But if you go up on Facebook and you look up the AOMCI, and a lot of people will submit questions. How do I test a condenser using an ohmmeter? And I almost give up in despair because I can't give them a presentation like this. How long would it take to type this kind of information? You can't do it. But when the points open up, you get that 200, 300 volt ring wave that comes off the primary. And there's no way you can test that with an ohmmeter or any condenser checker that you can get. Only these old condenser checkers, these old antique ones that put about 300 volts DC across with a neon light, that's the only thing that's going to tell you if that condenser is really going to work or not. I mean, I've seen so many people rebuild carburetors 2, 3, 4 times, change the points, check the key to see if the flywheel's out of position. And people go waste incredible amounts of time on this. The other thing I've seen is people trying to use the polyethylene capacitors like I was, but they get them only rated for about 300 or 400 volts. You need one rated about 800 volts so it doesn't break down with time. So a lot of people will try to use too small of a capacitor or something that's underrated, and it'll break down in about 2 months of operation when they're 10 miles offshore. I've seen that happen to people too. But this ceramic core is the way to do it, and again, this tester here with the neon light is really the only way. And that's the other advantage of being in the club. If you don't have the money to buy a tester for $150 or the skill to build your own, there's people like Gary, he's got a Graham Lee, I've got test equipment, there's people in the area. That's what we have the Western Reserve chapter for. You look us up, give us a call, stop on by. I mean, that's what the club is all about. We'll test as many condensers as you want. How long does it take? 4 seconds to test each one? It's not a big deal. How long is it going to take you to figure out that you've got a bad condenser without a tester like this? You'll never do it. But you'll rip your hair out if you had any left. Try to figure it out.
That would be a long time ago. Yeah.
I've seen more problems with this, well, probably as many as dirty carburetors. These are the two things that cause the most nightmares on old engines.
And dirty points.
Well, that too. Anything else?
That all you got?
Yeah.
Thanks, Bill.
I was just in time.